Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Keeley. I'm the Director of Development here in the VEU division at the Essential Services Commission. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands on which we're meeting today. For me, that's the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and elders of other communities who may be joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to attend this important session today. The aim is to help you understand your obligations and prepare for the ban on telemarketing and door knocking in the VEU program. And hopefully you will have got advice that the formal decision about the ban has been made. And so today's session won't focus on the merits of the ban. Instead, we're really focused on implementation. We'll run through the ban scope, the timeline and the industry support that we'll offer, what it means for industry and how to prepare, our compliance and enforcement approach, as well as providing a bit of time for questions after the presentations. We do expect that our presentation should address most of those questions, but we welcome those questions throughout. A lot of important information will be presented today, so I really encourage you to join, if possible, using a computer or a tablet for the best experience. Before we get stuck into the content, some quick housekeeping. We are recording the session and we'll make that available. Microphones are muted so we can all hear clearly. And as I said, the video recording and the presentation will be available on our website, along with further guidance material to be shared in the coming weeks. You may wish to submit a question throughout the presentation, and you can submit a question at any time. We'll respond to as many as we can after the presentations. We've got about 10 minutes set aside. So to do so, select the Q&A button in the menu, and if you're on a mobile device, click the three dots in the menu to find the Q&A button. If you've got any questions about the ban rationale or design, please direct those to the department at energy.upgrades@delp.vic.gov.au. And if you have any questions specific to your business, please email us at veu@esc.vic.gov.au. Any questions submitted today, including any that we don't get to, will inform the guidance material we publish in the coming weeks. Thanks again for your attendance. I'd like to now hand over to our Commissioner, Rebecca Billings.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see such strong attendance today, even if I can't see you in person. And a particular shout out to our VEU accredited persons and scheme participants. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today. We recognise the telemarketing and door knocking ban is a significant change for industry, and the Commission is committed to supporting you to prepare to comply. This ban is an important step to protect consumers. Unsolicited telemarketing and door knocking has caused harms to consumers and to the reputation of the program. The ban is an opportunity to build trust, confidence, and strength in the reputation of the VEU program. This will benefit everyone involved in working to deliver energy efficiencies for Victorians, including industry participants. While many of you rely on telemarketing and door knocking, many different forms of lead generation can continue to be used in the VEU program, provided that they comply with the VEU program rules and other relevant laws. This includes such things as advertising and social media, print media, television, radio, billboards, mail drops, and shopping centres. Our current focus is helping industry prepare for the ban and understand your obligations, including through this webinar and further practical resources to help you to comply. We expect all accredited persons and scheme participants to comply with the ban from commencement. The Commission will actively monitor compliance through our range of regulatory tools and will take strong enforcement action of breaches. The team is going to take you through more detail about how we will monitor compliance, so we can investigate and take swift action. It will include such things as collaboration with other regulators, surveying consumers post-certificate creation, and encouraging consumers and industry participants to report alleged breaches to us. I'm hoping that you will get a lot out of today's webinar, including practical information about what the ban means in practice and how to comply. Our goal is to support you to be ready on day one. Thank you all, and I will hand you over to Maureen Gooey now, who will take you through an overview of the ban. Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Rebecca, and morning, everyone. I'm Maureen Gooey, Manager of the Planning and Development team in the VU division. Today, I'll be stepping you through the changes as set out in Part 1A and Schedule 6 of the VEET regulations, which brings the telemarketing and door knocking ban into effect. Next slide, please. Under the new clause 111B of Schedule 6 of the VEET regulations, from the 1st of May this year, you will be prohibited from making telemarketing calls with express prior consent, requiring or permitting an employee, agent or contractor to make that telemarketing call without express prior consent, or purchasing consumer contact details that were obtained from a telemarketing call without prior consent. The regulations also provide that consent is taken to be withdrawn 3 months after the day on which the consent is given, or alternatively, at the end of the consent period if specified by the consumer when giving consent. The regulations also state that you do not contravene above provisions if the contravening act or omission was due to a reasonable mistake of fact, or where you or the business took reasonable precautions and exercised due diligence to avoid the contravening act or omission. Stephanie, our specialist advisor, will be discussing later in the webinar today what constitutes a reasonable mistake of fact and what constitutes taking reasonable precautions and exercising due diligence. Under the new clause 12 of Schedule 6 of the VEET regulations, from the 1st of August 2024, you will be prohibited from lead generation or marketing of VU activity at a consumer's home or business premises without express prior consent, requiring or permitting an employee, agent or contractor to lead generate or market a VU activity at their home or business premises without express prior consent, or purchasing consumer contact details that were obtained from calling at their home or business premises without express prior consent. Other things to note is you must leave the person's premises immediately on request, even where consent was previously given by the consumer for you to call on them at their premises. And similarly to the telemarketing consent provisions, consent is taken to be withdrawn 3 months after the day on which consent is given, or at the end of consent period specified by the consumer when giving consent. The regulations provide that you do not contravene above provisions if the contravening act or omission was due to a reasonable mistake of fact, which is something, as I said, alluded to before, Stephanie will discuss further in her presentation. So clause 9B of Part A of the VEET regulations prescribe that the above two clauses which I have spoken about, which is essentially clause 11B and clause 12, will be prescribed code of conduct requirements under the VEET Act. What does this mean? This means that under Section 14H of the VEET Act, it is an offence to contravene a prescribed code of conduct requirement. Therefore, breaching the above prohibitions on lead generation or marketing through cold calling or through door-to-door sales may result on the imposition of civil penalty units as set out in this slide. A civil penalty unit is currently set at $192.31, which means a potential penalty of just over $11,500 for a natural person or over $46,000 for a body corporate for an offence. In addition, contravention of prescribed code of conduct requirements under the Act provides the Commission with a wide range of compliance and enforcement powers to respond to breaches of the ban. Stephanie will be providing more detail on what compliance and enforcement powers are available to the Commission to respond to breaches of the ban further on in this webinar. I will now hand over to Maria Kukulis, who will be providing you more information on our plan for supporting industry to prepare for and comply with the ban.
Thanks, Maureen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maria Kukulis. I'm the manager of the engagement and compliance team for the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. And today I'll be talking you through the telemarketing and door knocking ban industry support timeline that's been established to support this transition. Thank you. On the current slide being presented, you'll note a timeline across the top of the page running from January through to December. And beneath this, we've provided you with a high-level view of the packages of work being delivered, and they're in those orange boxes. Directly beneath this section, we've broken down these packages of work into key tasks that have either been delivered or will be delivered ready for the implementation of the ban. From January, you will see that we've been working with DECA to inform the draft legislation. And in February, DECA released the draft regulatory impact statement via the Engage Vic website. And you would have all have received an update of that release, and you would have been given the opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed ban. From January to March, we've been preparing for the ban by finalising our compliance and enforcement approach, preparing and releasing industry communications, and planning for our engagement, which includes this webinar that we're having today, along with developing and updating our guidance materials and forms for both consumers and industry. From March to April, we've been conducting targeted stakeholder engagement with other regulators such as Consumer Affairs Victoria and the Australian Communications and Media Authority and other industry bodies on what the ban means to raise industry awareness. So we're now in April and there's a lot of work being delivered. We've been releasing communications with APs who we know to have conducted telemarketing, and we've advised them directly of the ban requirements, and we've been checking in on their preparedness and offering our support as needed. We've also been conducting one-on-one phone call engagement with these APs as well, again discussing their preparedness for the ban. And today we're holding our industry webinar, and we took your feedback, as I mentioned in the DECA RIS release webinar that most of you may have attended, that when we released our AP survey, we understood that compliance-focused webinars are what you were interested in and what you requested. As you've just been informed, the implementation of the ban has been announced, and we will be commencing on the 1st of May for telemarketing and the 1st of August for door knocking. So from the 1st of May, the telemarketing ban goes live and the new requirements will immediately kick in. So we're aiming to have our updated guidance materials released for you prior to this date. So from this point on, we'll continue to monitor compliance and we'll take compliance and enforcement action as needed. Now, monitoring will also include the surveying of consumers on how they were engaged to receive their products within the program, ensuring that express prior consent was appropriately obtained. And as you are aware, this is a really important aspect of the ban. We'll also be closely monitoring for any further communications or engagement sessions with you. And this includes preparing for the implementation of the door knocking ban on the 1st of August. And we're happy to receive feedback on this need from you. And we'll keep you posted on this as we get closer to that date. Next slide, please. We have had some administrative changes that have needed to occur prior to the implementation of the ban. So on the 8th of April, you would have received a program update from us that detailed the updates to the VIC assignment form and the VIC creation form. And that included the following information. So the forms were updated to allow the collection of consumer email addresses. And this is to allow us to conduct the consumer surveys that I previously mentioned. We've also made changes to the lead generation method field in the VIC creation form for activities 1, 3, 6, 15 and 17. And these have also been updated to include the selection of telemarketing with express consent and door-to-door sales with express consent as well. We've also included lead generation fields for activity 30 in the VIC creation form. I will highlight here that APs will need to update their VEEC assignment forms and VEEC creation forms by the 1st of May, ready to go live. So now I'm going to hand over to Stephanie Morrow, who's our Specialist Advisor in Regulatory Capability, to present on what the ban means in practice and how to comply.
Thank you very much, Maria. My name is Stephanie Morrow and I'm a Specialist Advisor here in the VU program. I'm really pleased to be able to spend the next 40 minutes talking you through some practical scenarios and advice so you can understand what the ban means in practice for you and how to comply. So I'm going to use the term cold call to refer to unsolicited telemarketing and door knocking. Cold calls will be banned under the new laws, as you've heard Maureen explain. I might also use the word warm call to refer to a call that you might make to a consumer where they've requested a telemarketing call or a visit to their home or business. A warm call remains lawful as long as you have got the express prior consent from your consumer to do that. So it's obvious that if you are an accredited person or a scheme participant who has used telemarketing or door knocking in the past, these new laws are relevant for you to understand. But it's also really important for you to understand these new laws if you have a business where you want to be able to call back a consumer who has made an online inquiry or who's otherwise requested a callback. If you want to make those sorts of warm calls for sales or marketing, you need to understand these new laws so that your practices are lawful. Today, we're going to cover the points that you see on the screen. So we're going to look at how to prepare for the bans, how you can generate leads lawfully, what consent is. That's obviously a big topic, so we'll spend a bit of time on that. And that includes how to keep a consent record and to identify when consent has been withdrawn. We're also going to look at how to lawfully conduct telemarketing and door knocking and what reasonable precautions and due diligence look like in practice. The two key themes that you'll realise are coming through in this whole 40 minutes of our discussion are that if you put the consumer at the centre of your practice, you're going to be on the right path to a smooth transition for these new laws and the right path for compliance. The second theme is that if you're ever in doubt, erring on the side of caution is the way to go if you want to give yourself the best chance of complying with the new laws. So let's move on to how to prepare for these bans. Our team has identified 3 main steps that every business needs to go through to prepare for these incoming bans, no matter the size of your business, whether you're a very large corporation or a very small one, or you're a sole business operator. There are 3 steps that you need to go through. The first step is represented by this image of a person with a document and a red pen. What do you think we might be talking about with this first step? Might be a little bit obvious. Let's see. Okay, we're talking here about, our images have gotten jumbled up, but that's okay. These words attached to our second image, which is an image of people around the table making a plan. And we've got an image of company officers. So that's your directors and any senior managers in your business need to sit around a table and to discuss how your company is preparing for the bans and what alternative marketing practices you're going to use. So how are you going to market and generate leads going forward, and what preparation are you going to implement? The next step you need to go through is represented by that first image of the person with a red pen and some paper. And of course, that step is reviewing your control measures. So your controls are the things you have in place to make sure that your staff and contractors do not break the bans, breach those bans. So the examples of the controls that you need to go and review will be things like your policies, standard operating procedures, Your software settings, that's a really important one that can be overlooked. If there is a particular type of software that your staff and contractors use when they're going about calling consumers, you need to check that all those protocols in the software are aligned to the new processes and policies that you put in place. And it will include things like your templates, contracts, and training documents. Those all need to be reviewed to make sure that they're compliant with the new laws. And finally, we have this image of a person at a blackboard and other people listening to them. What do you think might be going on for step 3? Well, of course, this one is training. So anyone in your business, whether that's an employee or contractor, who is involved in telemarketing or door knocking needs to be given some training to understand what the new laws mean for them and what your new policies are and how to follow the new procedures. So you need to make sure you've got appropriate induction protocols, but also training and retraining of your existing staff and contractors. The next thing we're going to talk about is the types of lead generation and marketing that remain lawful. So we have spoken about the fact that warm telemarketing calls and door knocking is lawful, but you need to have prior express consent to do those. How do you gather that prior express consent? Well, there are lots of avenues for lead generation that remain open to you. They include the things that you've always had available, like digital advertising through your website and social media posts. You've got your paid traditional media advertising on print, broadcast and digital, shopping centres, retail stores, billboards, posters, banners, mail drops, unless there is a no junk mail sign, and sponsorship of your local sporting groups, schools and so forth, getting in their newsletters and that sort of thing. There may be other avenues that you can think of. We wanted to call out specifically that you cannot use SMS messages or emails for marketing unless you have consent from the consumer to do so. That comes from the Spam Act and the spam regulations. So make sure you're familiar with those if you do want to send SMS messages or emails to potential clients. Now, on the next slide, we're going to start talking about consent. Specifically, express prior consent. And we're going to work through this topic using some examples. So here we have Val. Val is a manager at Company X. Company X is an AP, accredited person, and she's currently in a shopping mall. She's collecting consumer phone numbers so that Company X can conduct telemarketing for split system air conditioners. She has a stall in a major shopping centre, and as people walk by, she says, "Are you interested in reducing your energy bills? Just put your phone number here and we'll give you a call." Now, consumer Sue Bloggs walks past the stall and she says, "That sounds great." She writes down her phone number on the sheet of paper provided by Val. So, what do you think? Has Company X received prior express consent from Sue Bloggs to make a telemarketing call about the installation of a split system air conditioner? The answer is that Company X hasn't received express prior consent to telemarket to Sue. Company X needed to provide some extra information to Sue, and it needed to keep more information in their consent record. A good consent record looks something like what we have on our next slide. So here we have 2 example consent forms. On the left, we have one for a residential consumer, and on the right, we have one for a business consumer. These are excellent examples because they are clear for the consumer and they become a fantastic proof of consent for Company X if they ever need to demonstrate compliance to the Commission. The other thing that's wonderful about these forms is that they provide all the detail that your telemarketing or door knocking staff need to check and take into account before they make a call. So it sets them up for success. So let's have a quick look over the information that's included in these forms. We have, for the residential consumer, client name, date, contact details. They're able to indicate that they're over 18 years of age, whether they need an interpreter, whether they need support to understand and agree to contracts. A section where they can consent to company X contacting them to provide information about split system air conditioning and other products, and an acknowledgement that their consent lasts for 3 months. On the right, with our business version of the form, we collect different details. In this form, we collect name and date as usual, but also the business name that the employee or representative of the business works for, the position title of the person giving consent, and you allow them to tell you who you're allowed to speak to when you make the call. When you call the number, is the consent just to speak to Sue Bloggs, or is it also to speak to any member of staff who answers the phone or someone else? And of course, there's that area for them to acknowledge consent. So your form may look different depending on your business model, but this is a really nice example to show you what good practice looks like. Now we're going to have a look at an example where Company X has chosen not to use a form along the lines of what you have just seen. In this example, Company X has decided to use small print on the back of a raffle ticket. So here we've got Edith Bloggs, mother to Sue, who we heard about earlier. She's purchased a raffle ticket, and on the back of the ticket it says, "By entering this lottery, I consent to receiving marketing calls from Company X about products available for installation under the VU program." Now, what do you think are the problems here? It may be problematic to seek consent in a non-VEU related document because consent requires that Edith, in this case, is adequately informed about what she is consenting to. Small print or print on the reverse side of a form may not be sufficient for consent. So ask yourself when you're looking at your document whether it makes it clear to the ordinary person exactly what they're consenting to. The Commission's advice is that putting fine print on the back of a raffle ticket is not a good way to collect express prior consent, as it may lead to consumers being confused as to why you're calling and to contact us with a complaint. And I know you want to avoid that situation. Now let's have a look at Sam. Sam is employed by Company X, our AP, and in this example, Company X has done an excellent job of putting in place good controls and good training for Sam. Sam works in the telemarketing team and he has been given a stack of consent records, and one of them is Sue Bloggs' consent record that she filled in the shopping centre. So let's go through and have a look at what Sam does before he picks up the phone. The first thing he does is he picks up the consent record and sees the consumer name. Okay, I'm about to call Sue Bloggs. The next thing he does is he checks that consent record and he can see that the number Sue gave in the form is the same number he has entered onto the screen, so he performs that double check. The next thing he does is he checks the form and he can see that Sue gave her consent to his employer, Company X. Good. And he can see she agreed to hear about split system air conditioners, which is what he plans to talk about. He can also check that she gave consent less than 3 months ago and that her consent hasn't been withdrawn. The final thing he does with his consent form is he can see that she doesn't need an interpreter, she doesn't need support to understand contracts. Okay, he's ready to call Sue. This is fantastic best practice for Sam to go through this process before he picks up the phone. I want to specifically call out the fact that Sam has been able to check that the consent has not been withdrawn. When you develop your processes, you need to make it easy for your staff or contractors to make a note in the record if consent is withdrawn, and that can happen at any time. So make it easy for the record to be marked so that no one makes a call after that consent has expired. Now let's watch Sam make the call. He gets his phone and he calls. Ring, ring. And Sue Bloggs answers. Hello. Sam says, good morning. My name's Sam. I'm calling about Company X. I'm calling from Company X to speak to Sue Bloggs about split system air conditioners. Am I speaking with Sue? And Sue says, yes, it's me. So Sam says, nice to speak to you. A little while ago, you consented to a call from us to talk about possible split system air conditioner installation in your home. Is now a good time to talk? Sue says, sure it is. And the call continues and Sam can start his marketing of the products. So this is fantastic. It's exactly what Sam should do. He has checked with the consumer to ensure he's speaking to the right person before he starts providing information about the VU program. Now let's look at an example where the wrong person answers the phone. Here we have Sam ringing again, ring, ring. And this time it's Edith who says, hello. And Sam uses his same introduction. Good morning, my name is Sam, calling from Company X to speak to Sue Bloggs. Am I speaking with Sue? And this time Edith says, no, it's her mother Edith here. So Sam says, I've got a request from Sue Bloggs to call her on this number to give her information about split system air conditioners. Is Sue Bloggs available to speak to me? And Edith says, no, my daughter's not home right now. I can pass on a message. What's your phone number? And Sam gives his details, says, please let her know it's Sam from Company X. And Edith ends the call. Now, here we have Company X speaking to a consumer who hasn't given express prior consent. Do you think they have breached the telemarketing bans? The answer, of course, is that no. Company X has done exactly what it ought to have done. It has identified that the consumer they have consent from is not available, so they end the call before any marketing takes place. So well done, Sam. Well done, Company X. In our next example, however, Sam has not been properly trained and Company X doesn't have any good controls in place to prevent cold calling. So when he calls this time, Sam simply launches into, good morning. I'm calling about an incredible opportunity to upgrade your home's heating and cooling under the VU program. We're offering a product from Megacorp, which is fantastic. And poor Edith says, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested and you shouldn't be calling here. She hangs up the phone and she makes a complaint to us here at the Commission. And now our compliance and enforcement staff are reviewing her complaint. So this is a cold call. Edith didn't give express prior consent. Which of the three types of breach that Maureen outlined do you think Company X has committed here? Let's have a look. All right, so answer A is correct. We've got Company X making a cold call here, but it's also possible that they have breached the second ban, which is it's possible that Company X has permitted the cold call to occur because it lacked the controls that were necessary to prevent it from happening. We don't have any evidence based on the facts here to say that there was a purchase of a cold call lead. All right, now we're going to have a look at the fact that consent needs to be given to a particular person. So the scenario here is that Sue Bloggs has given express prior consent to Phone Corp to call her about weather sealing. Phone Corp sells the consent record to an AP called Cork & Co. Cork & Co then calls Sue Blogs to market weather sealing products that they can install for her. Question here is, has anyone breached the telemarketing ban rules? Do you think the answer is no, no one's breached the rules because Cork & Co is allowed to telemarket to Sue because they're marketing the products she consented to hearing about? Or do you think the answer is yes, Cork & Co has made a cold call because Sue consented to Phone Corp calling her? She didn't consent to Cork & Co calling her. Or do you think that you're not quite sure? Well, the answer here is yes, Cork & Co has made a cold call because Sue didn't give them consent to call her. She consented to Phone Corp calling her, not to Cork & Co. And it's also possible that Phone Corp has breached the telemarketing ban. It may be that in selling the consent records to Cork & Co, they permitted Cork & Co to cold call all the people in those consent records. So something to be very careful about. And again, I think if you keep in mind that guiding principle that you need to put your consumer at the centre of your policies, it becomes clear that you need to be as transparent and open as possible with your consumers. Give them all the information that they need to make informed choices. Now let's move to the next slide, which talks about how the ban affects purchasing of leads. You can see the big caution sign here, and that's because purchasing of leads has always been a high-risk activity because you need to ensure that those leads were lawfully generated, including, for example, that privacy disclosures were made to the consumer, that the Code of Conduct and the Australian Consumer Law and spam laws were complied with. The new bans introduce a further layer of complexity to purchasing leads. So both the telemarketing and door knocking bans now prohibit you acquiring contact details of consumers that were gathered via cold calls, whether that's telephone or door knocking cold calls. If you want to purchase leads, we strongly recommend that you get legal advice to make sure that you don't inadvertently breach these new bans, because you will be held liable if leads were obtained in breach of obligations. Reasonable precautions and due diligence will require you to take great care with any acquisition of consumer contact details. It's not sufficient to rely on a seller's statement that the leads were generated lawfully. And it's not sufficient for you to rely on their statement that the leads weren't gathered via cold calls. You must take positive steps to check the source of the leads, the legality of the marketing material methods, and you have to check the validity of the consent. On top of this, you have to remember, as we saw in the previous slide, that if you want to conduct telemarketing or door knocking when purchasing leads, the consumer has to be told that you, the purchaser, will be contacting them. So the main thing to take away here is to be very cautious if you're going to purchase leads from other companies, and we advise you get legal advice to help you. Now we have a slide looking briefly at aggregators. So if you're an aggregator AP, what are the steps you would need to undertake to ensure that scheme participants are complying with the ban when you are creating certificates for work that they have performed? As you know, Regulation 5 in the VEET regulations requires that you as an aggregator, or all APs in fact, that you ensure that the scheme participant complies with the Code of Conduct. So the same applies here. You must check the work of the scheme participant to satisfy yourself that unlawful telemarketing or door knocking did not occur at any stage after the introduction of the ban. And you can't merely take at face value statements such as No telemarketing or door knocking was used for marketing or lead generation. The law requires more than that. You must actually understand your scheme participants' processes, check their records, check their marketing materials. If relevant, check their consent records and controls. The same high standard of vigilance is expected of you as we described for people who purchase leads. Now let's have a look at Gino. Gino is a really dedicated employee of yours at Company X. He's in your telemarketing team with Sam, and he comes to you. Let's imagine you're Val, his manager, and he says, look, I've got some really good ideas on how we can keep telemarketing now that these new bans are in place without having to change the way we generate leads. And he shares these two ideas with you. Let's have a look. His first idea is that you could quickly call consumers to get their consent, hang up, and then call back. He says, I could pick up the phone and I could say, hi, I'm from Company X. Could I give you a call back to tell you about some energy efficiency products available at reduced cost through the VU program? And if the person says yes, you could hang up and call back again. Ta-da, you have your consent to the call. His second idea is to use your existing client network. He says, why don't we do something like this? Hi, Sue Blogs. We're just checking that you're happy with the weather seals we installed last week. You are? Fantastic. Would you like to hear about some other products we can install for you under the VU program? Now, what do you think? You're Val, his manager. You've looked over these new bans. What would you say to enthusiastic Gino? The answer would be, sorry, Gino. That's excellent creative thinking that you've done there, and I appreciate your enthusiasm. However, the two examples you have given me both are lead generation, and we can't conduct lead generation in a phone call without the consumer's express prior consent. So unfortunately, neither of these techniques would be lawful, and you'll have to gently let Gino down. Let's move to the next slide. Withdrawal of consent. Now, we all know that in the real world, people rarely use the words, I withdraw my consent, but people frequently do withdraw their consent to various things. So you're going to have protocols and training that make sure your staff and contractors recognise when a person is withdrawing their consent, even though they're not using those words. Let's have a look at some different ways, different things people might say to your staff and contractors during a telemarketing call or a home visit. And let's see what you think about whether they might be withdrawals of consent. First one, stop calling me. Second one, don't call me again. Third one, I'm not interested. Or all of the above. What do you think? Are any of these valid withdrawals of consent? Well, the answer is they're all withdrawals of consent. And it's not an exhaustive list of things that constitute withdrawal of consent. Of course, it can happen in many, many, many ways. It's easy to overcomplicate things, but you don't need to. If you have the consumer at the centre of your policies, and if you train your staff that if they're in doubt to ask the consumer, then you'll be on the right track to making sure you comply with the new laws. So you can train your staff to say things like, do you still want to continue this conversation? Would you prefer if I called you back? Are you happy for me to stay here, or do you need a bit of time to think about this? Those sorts of questions will help you understand how the consumer is feeling and try to improve your relationship with them if it has started to sour. Now let's talk about all the types of phone calls that are still perfectly lawful under the program. In fact, these are the sorts of phone calls that we definitely need you to keep making. So we've got phone calls to confirm or clarify information, to arrange a pre-installation inspection of an installation site after you've completed your marketing process, to arrange installation or service after the consumer is consented, to arrange a repair, replacement, removal of installation, to provide follow-up support or any safety or recall information. I mean, that's incredibly important, as is the next one, which is to provide dispute resolution services. So all of these types of calls don't involve lead generation or marketing. They are perfectly lawful for you to make and indeed very important. So there we go. I'm pleased to tell you we're finished with consent for now. So thank you for sticking with me through that. The key points that I hope you will take away are on the screen. So be really clear with your consumers. Good consent records are detailed. Don't try and hide the request for consent. Consent is given to a particular person or company. Start all your telemarketing calls and home or business visits by checking you're speaking to the right person. You can continue using the phone for your other functions, and you must train your staff and contractors to recognise and record withdrawal of consent. Now let's quickly talk about those things that Maureen mentioned. If you make a mistake, the law says that you won't be held responsible if you can demonstrate that it was a reasonable mistake of fact. But this is quite a narrow thing, a reasonable mistake of fact. So what's reasonable? Well, a mistake is reasonable when you have, one, actually considered whether or not a particular fact exists, and two, you have taken all reasonable steps to avoid the mistake. That's quite an onerous test. So if it's simply that you haven't thought about a particular fact or you ignored it, that will never constitute a reasonable mistake of fact. If you haven't taken reasonable steps to avoid the mistake, checking your controls, having good training, then the mistake won't be a reasonable one. The second thing that Maureen talked about was that if you make a mistake and you breach the bans, you won't be held responsible if you can demonstrate that you took reasonable precautions and exercised due diligence to prevent that mistake occurring. Now, how do you demonstrate that you've done this, and what is due diligence? Well, this means that you have effective controls in place to prevent breaches of the ban. That means your policies, your standard operating procedures, software settings, templates, training. And it means that your controls have been designed to prevent all three types of breach. That's making cold calls, requiring or permitting cold calls, and acquiring cold call leads. And of course, you'll notice that what we're talking about now is very similar to what we talked about at the start of my presentation around what you should do to prepare for the bans. In essence, reasonable precautions and due diligence is basically excellent preparation and excellent maintenance of your protocols to make sure they're up to date and they're working. On the next slide, we have some examples of practical steps that you can take to prepare for the ban and practical things that you can think about when you're going through and checking your controls. So practical steps include things like making sure that your staff and contractors are supervised during their learning period and have their work audited to ensure that you address any lack of understanding or non-compliant practices straight away. Your procedures should also be designed so that the chance of human error is minimised to the extent practicable. We all know that as human beings we make mistakes, we get tired, we type things incorrectly. That's no excuse. We all know that this is the limitation of working with human beings, so we need to design controls that will address those risks and make sure that we really minimise the chance that a single error can lead to a breach of the ban. You also need to make sure that you're giving all your consumers all the information they need to make an informed decision about whether to consent to telemarketing calls. So think about whether the consumer has been put at the centre of your processes. Are you being transparent? Are you being open and generous with the information you're providing to consumers? You need to make sure that the records you keep are clear and detailed, that you have a simple method for withdrawing consent, for recording that withdrawal of consent, and also make sure that your managerial staff are properly trained to never require or permit cold calling from their staff. And think carefully about your remuneration structure. Is it possible that you are accidentally incentivizing cold calls by the way you pay your staff and contractors? If so, change that remuneration structure. Okay, let's wrap up. So the summary that I want to finish with is that you need to take at least 3 key steps to prepare for the bans. You need to update all your controls, meet with your company officers to decide your business approach going forward, including your marketing plans, and you need to train all relevant staff and contractors. When you put the consumer at the centre of your policies, you're on the right track for compliance. When in doubt, you should err on the side of caution and train your staff and contractors to do the same. Your best defence against misconduct is good preparation. And very importantly, I want to reiterate what Maria said to you, which is we have a whole engagement team here ready and willing to help you. If you need some support, if anything that I have said today or Maria or Maureen has caused you any concern, pick up the phone or send us an email. We're here to provide support to you. So that's it for practical measures. I'm going to move on to our next topic. Unfortunately, you have to bear with me for another little while. I'm going to cover the compliance and enforcement approach that the Commission will be taking to the ban. So let's get stuck in, and I'll make this short and sweet. We know how much effort you're going through to prepare for these new bans, and for some of you, we know this is a really significant change. The Commission understands how important it is that we make sure your business isn't undermined by people doing the wrong thing. So this part of the webinar is designed to reassure you that the Commission is committed to making sure that breaches of the ban are identified, deterred, and appropriate enforcement action is taken, because we want there to be a fair playing field for all accredited persons. The Commission's approach, as always, is to be firm but fair. So we're currently working with all accredited persons who we know conduct telemarketing and door knocking, and with APs and scheme participants who have reached out to us to provide support to comply. You heard Maria talking about that program. That support's ongoing. So as I said, if any concerns have arisen for you today, pick up the phone and have a chat with us. We also know mistakes happen, which is why your preparation is so important. We do expect your genuine effort to prepare and comply with the new bans. And in the event that an accredited person or a scheme participant doesn't comply with the ban, compliance and enforcement action will be taken. But we also want to note that if you make that genuine effort to prepare and comply with the ban, if you make a mistake after the bans come into effect, on that first occasion, the Commission will consider that genuine effort that you have made to prepare and comply, and we will give consideration to that being a mitigating factor if there's no evidence of intentional or deliberate conduct. So help us to help you. Do make those genuine efforts to prepare and comply. We also strongly urge you, if you make a mistake, to tell us. Come to us with a self-report and at the same time tell us what you've done to make it right for the consumer and what you've done to adjust your protocols to make sure that the mistake doesn't happen again. If you do that, if you come to the Commission with that information and that transparent approach to us as a regulator, the Commission will take that into account when it considers what action it might take against the person who's done the wrong thing in response to the non-compliance. We also strongly encourage you to advise us if you hear of any participants in the program using unlawful telemarketing or door knocking once the ban is in effect. We need as much information from the market as possible to make sure that we can enforce these laws. And if you observe something that's not quite right or causes you concern, we want to hear about it. We will also be encouraging consumers to report alleged breaches of the ban to us so that we can investigate. And those are two important streams of evidence for us as we go forward. But another thing we will be doing, which is new, and as Maria explained, is that we will be contacting all consumers after certificate creation to survey them about the method of marketing and lead generation that was used for their installations. So you will see that we now expect consumer email addresses to be included in the certificate creation forms. That will be starting shortly. This will be another way that we can contact consumers and will help us to make sure that we reach all consumers to provide those surveys and gather that information about what's happening out there in the market. If we move to the next slide, this is some information about what responses you can expect to see the Commission having to misconduct that has been established based on evidence. The Commission has decided that it will take strong enforcement action against accredited persons and scheme participants where the ban has not been complied with. That action could include the Commission issuing penalty notices, imposing conditions on the accreditation of an AP. A condition might be something like requiring an external auditor to review activities prior to certificates being created, or similar things to try and protect consumers in the future. Other things that might be imposed include suspensions on accreditation for a period of time, or even cancellation of an accreditation. The Commission also has the power to institute civil penalty proceedings or even criminal prosecutions against accredited persons and scheme participants that don't comply with the bans. It's also important to note that if you're an officer of an AP, for example, a director or a senior manager, and you permit a breach of the ban to occur, you're also liable for that offence. And enforcement options that the Commission may consider for an officer who has permitted breaches might include things like accepting a court enforceable undertaking, instituting civil proceedings, or even criminal prosecution of that individual officer. Before we finish up on this topic, I want to note that the Commission already has a history of taking misconduct of this type very seriously. In fact, the Commission currently has penalty proceedings on foot in the Supreme Court of Victoria against Sumo Power for allegedly conducting unlawful door knocking and signing up customers without explicit informed consent. So do please be reassured that the Commission is absolutely committed to enforcing the law against those who do the wrong thing and ensuring that there is a fair playing field and that those of you who are doing all the right things to comply with this law are not disadvantaged in any way. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Maureen to kickstart our Q&A session.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was a very useful presentation, I found. So hopefully all our stakeholders found that really useful too. It was very detailed. But we will now have time for some questions. But hopefully, as we said, we're hoping that most of your questions were answered during that presentation. We have allocated only 10 minutes, so we will be focusing on answering the questions most relevant to ban preparedness and compliance. A reminder, as Dan ran through before, to post a question, you will need to select the Q&A button in the menu. And if you're on a mobile device, you'll need to click on the 3 dots in the menu to find the Q&A button. We did ask for questions in advance of the webinar. So as we said, we've only allowed a short time for additional questions. And just noting, we might not be able to get through all questions today, and we might also need to take some questions on notice. Questions, including those not answered, will inform our guidance material to be published on our website in the coming weeks. We will now just take a short break to give people additional time to post questions. And we've also just posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A window for you to complete. Which about how well prepared you are for the ban, as well as today's webinar. Just confirming that link is there, hopefully.
Link is there.
Great, thank you, Jason. So I might just pause for a minute. So just encouraging people to fill out that survey, but we do have some questions we have received, so I might just start reading them out. We've received a query from Jason Webster, and the question being if I think D2D means door-to-door sales agent is selling other products to businesses, for example, electricity and gas services. At the end of that sale, which is a non-VEU sale, can an agent request or ask permission of the merchant to return to the business post-sale to offer VEU products at a subsequent visit? Might throw that to Stephanie, perhaps?
The answer to that is no, you can't. And I think that our new regulations have been drafted quite specifically to prevent that sort of behaviour, because that is some of the behaviour that caused problems in the energy sector when they introduced their ban on telemarketing and door knocking. So no, what you've described is considered lead generation, possibly also marketing. And unless you have the consumer's express prior consent to conduct that lead generation during the home visit, you can't do it. So no.
Right, thanks, Stephanie. The next question is a very short question. What do I do if a consumer withdraws consent? Hopefully that's a simple answer.
I hope so too. So your consent record, it's really important. I guess there are two things. So if a consumer withdraws consent, just politely say, okay, thank you for your time, and leave the premises or end the phone call. I think it's perfectly okay if a consumer has withdrawn their consent to clarify. You could ask the question, would you like me to come back another time? Are you happy for me to call back another time? And they may say no, or they may say, yes, sure, call me tomorrow, that's a better thing. That's fine to just make that clarifying question. Once you've left the premises or you've ended the phone call, it's really important that there's a second step, which is going to your record of consent and marking that that consent is no longer valid, it's been withdrawn, just to make sure no one else in your business calls that person or visits that home. Let me know if that didn't answer the question.
Right. Another question on consent from Liam Jones. His question being, can express prior consent form or the script specify a different organisation other than the organisation capturing the consent, or a number of organisations that the consumer is consenting to be contacted by?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. Yeah, it is. Look, I think the first part is a clear yes. Absolutely. So in the example we had with Phone Corp and Cork & Co, perfectly fine if Phone Corp had said, do you consent to Cork & Co calling you? That's absolutely okay. Would it be okay for you to have a list a long list. That one, I don't think we can give a black and white answer. It might depend. So that might be one we take away and have a think about before we answer, or you might want to get some legal advice on before you confirm your practices.
Right. And yeah, thanks, Liam, for that question. Next question is from Anonymous, again on consent. Can a lead with express consent to an AP be passed to an AP's aggregation partner, for example, one in a regional area? Or does the customer need to contact them themselves? And what about the other way around?
All right. Could you repeat that? I'm sure I'm not the only
is a
one
bit
who would like it
tricky.
repeated. Yep. We might all need to listen carefully again.
Can a lead with express consent to an AP be passed to an AP's aggregation partner in a regional area?
Okay. So I'm imagining the lead. So it's the consumer contact details that have been generated with express prior consent. And could that be sent across to the AP's
partner? And I think the answer is
partner?
Potentially no, because the partner is not the person for which consent has been given to. Would that be correct, Stephanie? Or do we
Yes,
take
if
this on
that's
notice
the if that's the case, if the consent was for, you know, AP number 1 to call them back, AP number 2 certainly can't call them back. But yeah, it will all depend on the details. So I'm sorry, I can't picture it in my mind actually.
I guess it might depend on who the consent was given to. So if the AP obtained consent, again, as we said, was the consent obtained for the AP to contact the consumer, or was the consent obtained from the AP for the AP's aggregation partner to contact the consumer? So it would depend on who was the organisation being nominated that for consent to be given to, perhaps. But again, we might just need to clarify that particular point.
Yeah, a few extra details would really help us to make it clear.
As we can see, all very a bit tricky, really, once it gets into the detail. I might just move on to the next question, though. And as I said, we will try to clarify a lot of these points in our updated guidance, which we'll be hoping to publish before the 1st of May. Next question. Sorry, my mouse is kind of paused. Next question being, and this is one from Chirag, will ESC accept pre-installation recordings as evidence for compliance if they document the method of contact with the consumer, such as referral or social media, even if the consumer later refuses to accept it? So I might throw this one to maybe Maria. Did you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what Chirag's meaning by pre-installation recording. So there'll be different ways to get consent. And that can be taken online. If it's via recording, just a little bit concerned there. If you're obtaining a referral from another person, it sounds likely that could be no express consent has been obtained, and you need to exercise caution with that. And also important to remember that consent can also be withdrawn, and if it's via recording, it's going to be a little bit hard to cover. So I think I'd like to just probably get in touch with Chirag and understand what he's meaning by that a little bit further, and to clarify that offline.
Sounds great. There's been a few questions about whether the ban is for business consumers as well as residential consumers. Just noting we have provided written response but just to clarify, it is for both business and residential. The next question for answering comes from Jack Labno. I don't quite understand the consent option. If the consumer gave consent, then presumably he or she was already contacted, and so the subsequent calls would not be cold calling or telemarketing, but a follow-up.
Okay. Yes, I can understand that there can be some confusion around the language. So the word cold call is something that we're using as a shorthand to describe the unlawful behaviour. So once the ban comes into effect, you're quite right that if you have consent from a consumer to give them a call, that's lawful. We still call that telemarketing because you're conducting marketing over the phone, but we would say that that's lawful telemarketing. Whereas if you make a phone call to conduct marketing over the phone without consent, that's unlawful, and we've called that a cold call. I hope that clarifies. So both telemarketing and door knocking can still be done lawfully after the bans come into effect with consumer express prior consent. And that's why in my session I used the language of a warm call. So if the consumer has requested you to call them or to contact them at their place of work or their home, it's like a warm call where they know that you're coming, they've asked you to come and make the call or the visit to them. It's still telemarketing or door knocking because you're still going to their home or picking up the phone to conduct marketing, but it's not the same as a cold call where no one has asked you to give them that call. I hope that clarifies the situation.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's probably all the questions that I can see published from questions submitted. I think we're at 11:40. Just giving time for the moderators to publish any additional questions, if there are any additional questions, because we are slightly ahead of time. I might just hand over back to Dan, perhaps. So sorry, just to confirm. So, yep, I might just hand it back to Dan to make some closing remarks for the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maureen. And also thanks to Stephanie and thanks to Maria as well for those presentations and Q&As. Now, we haven't been able to get to all of the questions submitted. We will follow up with submitters individually. Partly that is because some of those questions related to very specific business activities, and we thought better to direct those individually than to try and answer them in this forum. But we do thank you for those questions, and they will help inform our guidance, which is in development. So thank you for your time today. I hope you found the session useful and you've got a clearer idea of what the ban means for your business, how to prepare and to comply. As I said, your questions and the survey responses will help inform our work and make sure we support you effectively. So if you haven't had a chance to fill in the survey yet, I really encourage you to click on that link and provide your feedback. Please get in touch with our team if you need further guidance to assist you in your preparations. Our contact details are on screen. We look forward to working with you to make this ban a success for the good of the program and in the best interests of our consumers. The webinar video recording and presentation will be available on our website soon. We did note that it looked like the recording stopped at some point. If that's the case, we'll make sure we re-record those segments and get them uploaded. Further guidance material will also be shared in the coming weeks, informed by your questions today, and we'll let you know when these are available. Other guidance materials and resources will also be shared prior to commencement of the ban. Thank you very much to all of you for making the time out of your busy mornings, and we look forward to more engagement ahead of the 1st of May. Thank you.